Committee will come to order without objection. The chair is authorized to declare recess at any time. We welcome everyone to today's hearing on oversight of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosive. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin the hearing with opening statement. Chair recognizes himself. Government's not supposed to change the rules without a vote of Congress. Executive branch executes the laws, the legislative branch passes the laws. But when you bypass that format, which is exactly what the ATF has done, you get all kinds of bad things. First, it was the pistol brace rule. November 26, 2012, the ATF told the inventor of the pistol brace, quote, he would not be subject to the National Firearms Act. But last year, they changed the rule. After 12 years, changed the rule. The rule, by the way, the pistol brace was put together to help disabled veterans be able to shoot, be able to practice and shoot at the range. Now, with the rule change, if you don't turn it in, get rid of it, you become a felon. Then it was a policy change that the ATF enacted. The ATF now says if a federal firearms licensee makes a mistake on the form, even if it's a clerical mistake, well, that now equals a, quote, willful falsifying of records, and they could lose their license. In fact, 157 FFLs lost their license last year in this gotcha game that the ATF is playing with people who are in the business of selling firearms. And the pressure to deal with what the ATF comes out and finds you made some mistake on a form, many people are just voluntarily giving up their FFL. 24 in 2021, 69 in 2022, 80 people last year gave up their license versus dealing with the hassle from the agency that's supposed to help them comply, not put them out of business. And finally, there's the new definition of who actually needs a federal firearms license. Since 1968, the definition said it had to be your principal livelihood in the business of selling firearms. You needed that. If you were doing that, you needed an FFL. But this past Monday, new definition was put in place. It said if you're earning a profit, ATF can't really define what that means. You sell one gun to your cousin, made $10, made $50 on the sale of a gun, 2 guns to someone, 10 guns. In fact, they couldn't even tell the court how it works, this new definition. When you make up the rules as you go, bad things happen. You lose your livelihood for a clerical error. You become a felon for having a pistol brace they told you was legal for 12 years. And you might even get shot. That's what happened to Brian Malinowski just 2 months ago. We have Brian's widow with us today. She was here with us yesterday. Heard some powerful testimony from U.S. Attorney Bud Cummings, who represents the Malinowski family. In fact, I'm going to read from Mr. Cummings' testimony that he gave in this room yesterday. It's legal to buy, trade, and sell guns without a federal firearms license if you are a collector or hobbyist. But at some point, the ATF decided that Brian Malinowski had crossed a murky line, and he was no longer a hobbyist. Because of that, ATF concluded he was required to purchase a $200 federal firearms license before he sold any more guns. I call it murky because there is no bright line test. It's truly subjective. But one thing seems certain. Brian Malinowski received no warning. His family, his friends, his work colleagues would all guarantee you he loved his career and he would have never knowingly jeopardized it over a weekend hobby. His real job, his main job, the only job, was he ran the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, highest paid official in the municipal government, made $260,000 a year. But on March 19th at 6:01 a.m., over 1 hour before sunup, 10 carloads of ATF agents and Little Rock Police Department officers came to the Malinowski home to execute their search warrant. Not an arrest warrant, search warrant. At 6:02:46 a.m., ATF agents in full SWAT gear approached the front door. They had a piece of tape ready to cover the camera lens of the doorbell camera, which they did. Next, Mrs. Malinowski heard only a loud crash as her front door caved in. Her husband, Brian, woke up to the sound of the crash, found a pistol, loaded a magazine, and left the bedroom to investigate. Brian warned his wife to stay behind in the bedroom, but Mayor stubbornly followed him down the hallway. The ATF apparently killed electricity to the home. The front room was usually well lit at night, but Mrs. Malinowski saw only darkness as she peered down towards the front entryway. She could only see shadowy outlines of presumed home invaders standing in her front hallway. That's what Brian saw too. Brian fired a few shots at the intruders' feet to drive them back out of the front door. The ATF shot Brian in the head. His wife was standing inches away from him. A mere 57 seconds. 57 seconds elapsed from the time agents covered the doorbell camera until gunshots erupted and Brian was fatally wounded. 6:02:46 to 6:03:43. Agents immediately dragged Mrs. Malinowski into the front yard. She was barefoot, wearing minimal night clothing, and the temperature was 34 degrees. They locked her in the back seat of a car and detained her there for 4 hours, refusing her many requests to check on her husband. Her husband she had just seen shot, wouldn't allow her to get close or even use the neighbor's bathroom. Even though policies have been in place at both the ATF and the Little Rock Police Department for the past 3 years, requiring the use of body-worn cameras when executing any search warrant, the Department of Justice tells us that no body cameras were used. If this isn't the weaponization of government, I don't know what is. I don't know what is. Mr. Dettelbach, we're going to have questions about this and a host of other things the ATF has done under your watch. A host of other things. We appreciate you being here today. We appreciate you taking our questions, but there's going to be tough questions from folks on our side. And we have a video I'd like to show, which just so it's a minute and a half, but it first shows ATF agents assembling in the Walmart parking lot a week before March 19th, when they were going to execute this search warrant. Again, pre-dawn hours a week before, but decided not to because they realized Mr. Malinowski wasn't home. And then it shows what happened a week later as they approached the Malinowski home. So let's run the video. Chair now recognizes the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, we last conducted an oversight hearing of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, or ATF, just over 1 year ago. Since that time, a few things have changed and a great many things have stayed the same. Let's begin with what has changed. Last month, the Attorney General signed an ATF final rule clarifying who is, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms, and who must therefore obtain a license to sell firearms and conduct the necessary background checks. This rule implements a change in this definition made by Congress when we passed the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first significant piece of gun violence prevention legislation in nearly 30 years. Prior to the passage of the BSCA, a person was, quote, engaged in the business, unquote, of selling firearms if they did so, quote, with the principal objective of livelihood and profit, close quote. But under the new law, a person is engaged in the business of selling firearms if they do so, quote, to predominantly earn a profit, unquote. In finalizing this new rule, ATF has adhered to its directive from Congress and has ensured that ATF regulations are consistent with the definitions we updated through this historic legislation that makes Americans safer. Importantly, the new definition and the new rule ensure that more gun sales, including those at gun shows or through the internet, include a background check, a life-saving tool that keeps guns out of dangerous hands. These changes are the only significant expansion of the federal background check system since it was established in the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act in 1993. The Department of Justice estimates that there are over 20,000 unlicensed sellers who are taking advantage of ambiguity in the law and who will now have to obtain a license and conduct background checks. Yesterday, in a related hearing, Republicans argued that this new rule is being used to target individuals who are merely selling a gun from their personal collection or who occasionally buy and sell guns as part of a hobby. This is false. The rule, quote, expressly recognizes that individuals who purchase firearms for the enhancement of a personal collection or a legitimate lobby are permitted by the Gun Control Act to occasionally buy and sell firearms for those purposes or occasionally resell to a licensee or to a family member for lawful purposes without the need to obtain a license, close quote. The final rule also states that, quote, nothing in this rule shall be construed as precluding a person from lawfully acquiring a firearm for self-protection or other lawful personal use, close quote. The law and the rule do not impose any new requirements on those who are merely selling a firearm to a neighbor, a friend, or family member, or those who collect and occasionally sell firearms as part of their hobby. Rather than targeting innocent lobbyist sellers, this rule will prevent illegal gun sellers from profiting off gun trafficking. This comes at a critical time, given that the ATF's National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment revealed that unlicensed gun sales were contributing more and more to the flow of firearms into the black market and, unsurprisingly, becoming a leading source of crime guns. The second new development since we last heard from ATF Director Dettelbach is that Republicans used their control of the House to enact significant cuts to several critical law enforcement agencies, including the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the ATF. We knew this was coming because Republicans have been forthright in their determination to defund, intimidate, and hamstring the agency so that it can no longer effectively do its job and protect Americans from violent crime. Republicans' own messaging documents actually celebrate the 7% cut to the ATF, the law enforcement agency responsible for protecting communities from gun violence, stopping gun trafficking, and ensuring lawful and responsible gun ownership. This brings me to what is still as true today as it was over a year ago when we last conducted an oversight hearing of the ATF. ATF is still the primary federal agency tasked with keeping guns out of the wrong hands, and it is still doing that important work even with the budget cuts forced through by House Republicans. ATF is still providing vital resources that help state and local law enforcement solve crimes and prevent gun violence. ATF is still the only agency in the country that is able to trace crime guns, helping law enforcement determine how a gun came to be owned and used in a violent crime. ATF is also still the only agency that provides local, state, tribal, and federal law enforcement with ballistic imaging analysis, a critical tool that can help solve crime and prevent further gun violence. It provides its assistance at no cost to its law enforcement partners. Despite the significant value that ATF provides to state and local law enforcement, Republicans have defunded the agency, and they repeatedly seek to unravel its regulations through litigation, Congressional Review Act resolutions, and frivolous investigations, even when ATF is merely following the law as directed by Congress. Some Republicans have even introduced a bill to abolish the ATF altogether. The majority says that it stands with law enforcement. So why does it seek to abolish the only law enforcement agency with the capability of tracing crime guns? The majority says that they support state and local police. So why do they attempt to starve the agency that provides state and local police officers with so many critical resources for solving crime, including homicides, gun trafficking, and organized crime? And why do they oppose common sense protections like background checks and red flag laws favored by state and local police agencies nationwide? The answer lies in another part of ATF's responsibilities, making sure that gun dealers follow the law by conducting background checks, refusing to sell to those who are not allowed to have firearms, and keeping records so that crime guns can be traced. The overwhelming majority of gun sellers have no problem following these laws, but when gun dealers willfully refuse to follow them, it is ATF's responsibility to revoke their license to sell. Republicans' priorities are clear. They would prefer to keep every gun store in the country open, even those that willfully violate the law, rather than to let ATF save lives simply by enforcing the law. And this brings me to the final thing that is still the same since our last oversight hearing. It is still the case that we're losing more than 100 Americans to gun violence every single day. Even without counting suicides, we have already lost more than 6,000 Americans to shootings so far this year. That includes 88 young children, 454 teens, and 30 law enforcement officers who were killed by gunfire just this year. Democrats have put forth a range of solutions to prevent gun violence, to support law enforcement, and to solve crimes. But since they took control of the House, our Republican colleagues have not advanced a single bill that would make Americans safer from gun violence. Instead, they have continued to push for unfettered access to assault weapons, concealable rifles, and ghost guns, and to abolish the very agency tasked with preventing gun crimes. As Republicans continue to seek freedom from gun regulations, we will continue to see communities free from gun violence. Director Dettelbach, thank you for appearing here today to talk about the important work that the ATF does to keep Americans safe. I look forward to your testimony, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back $1.4 billion in 2022, $1.6 billion in 2023, $1.75 billion in 2024. Hardly a cut to their budget. Without objections, all other opening statements will be included in the record. We will now introduce today's witness. Mr. Dettelbach is the director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives. He was sworn in on July 13th, 2022. We welcome our witness and thank him for appearing today. We'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true, correct, to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witness has answered in the affirmative. Thank you. You can be seated. Please know your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we ask that you summarize your testimony. Director Dettelbach, you may begin.
Chairman Jordan, Ranking Member Nadler, members of the committee. When I testified last year, I said it was my great honor to lead the dedicated employees of ATF. This year, I'll repeat that statement and add that agents run toward gunfire to protect strangers, and our staff works day and night to support our mission. Their work in the last year has been nothing short of spectacular. As I stated last year, the level of violent crime in America is unacceptable. However, due to the hard work of these heroes and our partners, we have made significant progress in making communities safer. Last year, our nation saw one of the steepest single-year declines in violent crime in its history. Murders down nearly 13% across 175 cities. This doesn't happen by accident. It is a result of hard and very dangerous work. In 2022, federal weapons convictions hit a record high, according to recent reporting. In 2023, ATF's criminal enforcement efforts were up again. We indicted even more cases and increased convictions by 8.5%. And the cases that we do make an impact because we focus on removing the most violent offenders from our streets. This progress tells us the strategies are working. It is not the time to let up now. ATF's data-driven support helps law enforcement lock up the trigger pullers and stop the flow of illegal guns to them from trafficking. We must go after both the shooters and the criminal traffickers, both. That is the only way we will continue to drive down firearms crime. Firearms trafficking is not a victimless crime. Those who illegally arm violent people, gang members, drug dealers, they are responsible for the violence that follows. A recent ATF report shows that 60% of trafficked firearms go to convicted felons and prohibited people, and thousands of these trafficked guns are used in murders and shootings. Furthermore, the most common type of firearms trafficking now is dealing firearms for profit without a license. In Midland, Odessa, Texas, for example, in 2019, a man who couldn't pass a background check from a licensed dealer instead went and got a gun from an illegally unlicensed firearm dealer. The result, a deal in a parking lot, a mass shooting, 7 dead, 25 shot, 3 police officers, and a 17-month-old child. These types of crimes prompted Congress to pass the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act 2 years ago. The law provided new tools to hold firearms traffickers accountable. Since then, the Department of Justice, led by ATF and prosecutors, has charged nearly 500 defendants under those new provisions. Motivated by cases like the murders in Midland, Odessa, Congress also included a specific provision expanding who must obtain a federal license to deal firearms, and therefore, crucially, who must conduct background checks before selling those guns. Last month, ATF used the authority Congress delegated to it to issue a final rule on being, quote, engaged in the business of firearms dealing. This rule helps to identify those who must be licensed under Congress's law and is designed to raise compliance with the statute Congress wrote. Even with our progress, the toll of gun violence remains crushing. More than 40,000 people died from gun violence last year. Another 36,000 suffered grievous wounds or wounds from gun violence. And those are not just numbers. We all know, we agree those are real people, their parents, their brothers, their sisters, and their children. In fact, the leading cause of death for American children is gun violence. Not cars, not cancer, guns. That is unacceptable. We're reminded too often, it was 2 years ago tomorrow, in fact, that a shooter opened fire at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, murdering 19 kids, 2 teachers, shooting 17 others. We know there's been so many other tragedies like this. And last but not certainly least, as we commemorated Police Week last week, we're reminded that all too often, the victims of firearms violence carry the badge. Last year, 49 brave officers were killed in the line of duty by gunfire. This year, that number is already at 22, including 4 officers in North Carolina who went to the funeral gunned down while executing a warrant at the home of a firearms violator. We have to support law enforcement together, including giving law enforcement the resources we need to protect Americans. Again, now is not the time to let up. We know what works. The data are supporting it. It's time to double and triple down together on our efforts to save more lives. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee, I look forward to your questions.
We'll now proceed under the 5-minute rule. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Dettelbach, in February, Chairman Biggs and I sent you a letter concerning the pipe bombs that were discovered on January 6th. These were pipe bombs from over 3 years ago, and the investigation surrounding it. After months without a response, day before yesterday, your department finally gave us a non-response. To be clear, the response was wholly inadequate and borders on showing contempt for Congress. To quote from the letter, this investigation remains ongoing. Accordingly, pursuant to longstanding Department of Justice policy, ATF cannot provide details. It goes on. This is about the safety of Congress. These bombs were a couple blocks from here, yet you refuse to answer questions about them. If you don't have contempt for us, I'll give you an opportunity to respond to some of my questions here today. Are you willing to answer those questions today?
I'm willing to try within the rules, which longstanding rules. I've been in 5 administrations at the Department of Justice, Democrat and Republican. And longstanding policy of the Department of Justice in both types of administration, on both sides, has been we do not comment on pending investigations.
Right. That's a policy. It's not been through some kind of rulemaking. That's a policy, and you can say that to the media, but you can't say it to Congress. We created your department. How many ATF personnel were on the Capitol premises on January 6, 2021?
I don't believe I can answer specific questions about the investigation. I know that may not relate to the investigation. So I know that I wasn't here during that period. That predated my time on January 6th, the January 6th attacks. So I know there were some ATF agents who were called to help protect members of Congress. I don't know how many.
Well, that's not an acceptable answer. We've asked you this months ago, and you just send us a letter saying you can't answer that. Yet, according to a FOIA report obtained by Judicial Watch, there were 19 people here. So for you to say you don't know or you can't tell us is ludicrous. I mean, these are subject to FOIA reports.
Congress,